there's a through line on the Rambling Runner side of things. It's that achievement isn't something that can be predicted positively or negatively, but if you put yourself in the fight consistently and do it in a way where you're constantly trying to grow and approaching your work with a mental and emotional, steadfastness that's not going to deviate when the downturns happen, then you're going to potentially put yourself in a position to achieve what you want to achieve, even if those goals are outlandish or they're stretch goals or the things that you would have never imagined even 5 or 10 years ago. So finding people who can speak to that sort of thing or who are in the process of doing that, I think is really fun. And I think that I've changed things over time in terms of not only talking to people who are basically at the point where they've already overcome many of the hurdles, but finding people along the way who are maybe earlier in their journey and they've overcome some hurdles, but there's probably some more to happen. And maybe they come on again to talk about how things have progressed since the first time they've been on the episode. And I think the nice part about my show is that because I'm talking to dedicated amateur runners, usually it's before they hit the big time. And there's been a fun little thing where for a lot of people, their first time on a podcast is on the Rambling Runner. And then, 2, 3, 4 years later, you're like, wow, that person's like really famous now in the running space. And like they've been on a number of shows. Sometimes they start their own podcast. And it's fun to look back and be like, hey, their first time coming on a show happened to be on the Rambling Runner, which is always a fun thing for me.
What have you learned about yourself as a communicator through podcasting that coaching alone didn't necessarily show you, or maybe something in life didn't necessarily show you?
It's reinforced things that I've learned professionally. So when I was spending a lot of my time as a coach, it was about imparting knowledge in as concise a manner as possible. In my time as a fundraiser, which I did for a decade as well in higher ed, it was about asking questions and really drilling down into what mattered for people and then advocating for that college or university once we've had those kind of conversations. So those two things together, no one would have ever laid out like a plan of like, here's how to become a pretty good podcaster, is to become a college basketball coach and then become a college fundraiser and then to take the skills from both and then kind of join them together with some experience. But that's kind of what happened because talking in a way that can be potentially, hopefully, efficient while delivering a message. Of course, my show is called The Rambling Runner, so maybe I don't hit the efficiency side as much as I would like. And then the other piece of asking pertinent questions and allowing somebody the space to answer those and then following up in a meaningful way and not glazing over what they said just so I can get to the next question on the list, but to really figure out like, hey, the most important question usually isn't the question that you set out to ask. It's usually the second, third, or eighth follow-up question that really digs to the gold that's inside of somebody, because usually it's that self-inspection or on their part or me allowing them to get to the stuff that they've, that's in there that they maybe didn't want to volunteer at first, or that they weren't sure it was like, if this was really the right medium to talk about that sort of thing. But ultimately, that usually is where the good stuff happens. So I would say if you're listening to a podcast, listen to the first 15 minutes, because if it's an interview show, usually the good stuff happens after that. Yeah. And I would say that for hosts, one of the biggest things is becoming more comfortable with the idea of what's happening in the conversation is the most important thing. You absolutely want to do your research. You want to have some idea of where you think the conversation is going to go, but there's no way to know the things that you don't know or can't find out in your research. So you need to be able to shift and see exactly how the conversation is going. And I think early on, a lot of newer podcasters who are doing interview shows overly rely on their pre-programmed questions, in part because it gives them a sense of control and maybe eases some of the anxiety and nervousness that comes with the endeavor. I still get nervous. I've done over 1,000 of these. That never ends. So, spoiler alert, you're still going to be nervous in 2 years. But I know it's tough. But at the same time, those pre-programmed questions, while they may feel like a security blanket, ultimately do your show a disservice and ultimately can turn off your audience, because they are listening to you ask these questions and they're begging you to ask that incisive follow-up question that the interviewee is basically also hoping that you ask, or is it leading you down that path? And I think that your list of 20, 30, 40 questions that you have on your sheet may be the byproduct of some high quality research, but ultimately will steer the conversation away from the dream scenario.
That is profound for podcasting. And since we're a podcast about podcasting, that was great advice. We're going to clip that.
I like that too.
Well, the other thing too is it's not even necessarily the words, right? Like if someone was answering a question, like just imagine you're not podcasting, where you're talking to a friend, right? And you're like, hey, how was your night last night? Or they had a date or something, right? And they said, they're like, oh, it was good. And like that pause says it all, right? So like you're immediately going to ask about that, either directly or you're going to ask like questions in and around it to try to get to it. Whereas if you just saw a transcript of the answer, it might not stand out. But because you're listening to the person talk, in this situation, we can see each other, so you can see the mannerisms and the look up to the sky and maybe the tilt of the head that kind of alludes to the idea that there's more there. I think that's just like a very basic one, but like those are the conversational cues that people would pick up on immediately. But sometimes when we're podcasting, we're either missing it because we're cued into what question number 7 is, or we're worried that we're trying to think of the next question, or we're too scared to ask. And I think that ultimately, almost none of these shows are live, so you can always edit out the awkwardness, right? Lord knows that I edit out awkwardness in every single episode. There's no question about that.
Oh yeah.
And lastly, they asked to be on they agreed to be on the show. So as long as you're not asking something that's inappropriate, or if there's a touchy subject that you feel like you might get to in a conversation, you can ask them ahead of time, right? I've done that a million times, asking people like, hey, say someone, in running circles, it's not uncommon for a runner to have a history with disordered eating. Let's just put that as an example, right? And there may be someone I'm having on the show who has gone through that, maybe has shared their experience with disordered eating or hinted at it. When that's the case, I'll ask them before the podcast even starts, like, hey, I know you've shared about this in the past. Is this something that you'd be willing to talk about? Or there's certain areas that you'd prefer to stay away from, so on and so forth. So if you have questions or topics that you want to talk to someone about, but you're not sure if it's okay, then just bring it up before you press record. See what they say.
It's true.
Since we're talking about being in experience with the podcasting, so if you could go back to your first year in podcasting, what would you say to that version of yourself?
That's a good question. Usually what happens for me is I tend to be like, all right, this is going to be amazing. And I have too high expectations. I think one of the things I did well is that I didn't approach the podcasting like that. I would say that my early years worked out well. I would say that if I could go back in time, I might go back to year 3. So year 1 was just getting my feet wet. Year 2 was rapid growth. Year 3 for me, I became, I think, a little too comfortable and kind of took my foot off the gas a little bit because I was in no man's land. I couldn't believe what was happening. It was like a shocking experience to me. And I started to just say, okay, this is great. Let's just leave it at this. Like everything's going great. And I didn't push as much as I could have, or, try new things. I think I became a little okay with how things had progressed. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that in retrospect, I could have kept pushing the envelope or, making myself uncomfortable and done things like that, which could have been ultimately would have served me better, especially in terms of doing stuff live, with audiences, expanding out into, in-person type stuff as opposed to just kind of staying behind my desk. So I think ultimately that would have been the biggest thing I would change. Whatever successes I've had have been built on failures. All right. So from the podcast production side, it's just been straight up learning from failure over and over and over again. And then in every other way possible too in this industry. So all the stuff that you're saying, I really appreciate it, but make no mistake, none of this came from, anything other than me failing over and over and over again, and hopefully learning from some of those experiences. With that said, if you want to learn more about me and what I'm doing, I guess the easiest way is to follow me on whichever podcasting platform you use, whether that's Podbean or any other one. Also over on Instagram at rambling_runner. If you want to listen to more topical running content, you can also follow the Relay podcast or relay_site over on IG. Those, I think, the best ways. And if you ever have a question about your podcasting journey or anything related to what I'm doing, feel free to reach out at ramblingrunnerpodcast@gmail.com.
Health is wealth and knowledge is power. And Mr. Matt Chittum has it all. Follow him on the Rambling Runner. We are huge. I was a fan, but now I'm like a huge fan. Your mindset, just your outlook on life, the way that you service and help others, and your resume building up to that, being a coach, being somebody, a mentor, essentially. And, you know, I would like to label you the running father of podcasts.
I can't take it. There were some people before me, so I will say that. If you're going to say anyone is the king or queen of running podcasts, I will say that is Allie Feller. Go follow her show, Allie on the Run. That's the #1 worldwide. She is amazing, and she is truly the king or queen of the running podcast game. So I bow down to her and everything she's doing.
So much humility, so much humbleness. Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Truly, we appreciate, you know, the efforts and acknowledge you as a podcaster, not only teaching yourself, but building a podcasting empire from the ground up with millions of downloads. And you are doing the dang thing every day. So thank you for taking the time out of your day to help us out and give some advice on podcasting, because it is really useful, truthfully.
Well, it's my pleasure. I appreciate you having me on and giving me a platform to talk about this. This is going to be a hard space to work in because it's very lonely. A lot of times people are doing this by themselves in their house in odd hours of the day, and there's no immediate gratification. And it can be one of those things where it's like, you know, you go back 20 years, it's like starting a blog. It's like, is this working? Am I connecting to anybody? The only feedback I get is negative. Like I mess up. No one ever tells me if I'm doing a good job. And not to say that I crave that, but it's like when you do stuff over and over again, or you work hard at what you're trying to build, it can be a lonely experience, especially when you're doing it literally by yourself in your house.
Absolutely. And let us be the ones to tell you, you are killing it, King. You are doing the dang thing.
I appreciate that.
And no, we at Podbean are very proud to see a podcaster so into the space and so just themselves, and you are definitely a light. I thoroughly enjoyed the interview.
Me too.
That's really nice of you to say. Thank you so much.